Here we go. Hi, welcome to the stream. This is called Recreation Number One, and the title is inspired by a friend of the show, or I'm a friend of his show, Cl- Klaus von Recht. He calls his uh, he calls his round the table free for all discussions El Asado. Um, I'm Hispano adjacent, not necessarily part of that crowd, so I picked a title that's more Anglo friendly, recreation, and it's also a throwback to um, the schedules that they have in religious houses. They'd have an hour or two a day called recreation, where you basically hang out with your brother monks and uh, play board games and talk about whatever. Um, it's almost like a waking siesta, if I were to describe it as anything. Um, so what's been new with me lately? Well, last week and the week before, I was basically bedridden because I had some sort of respiratory bug. And the thing is, no, I don't know if it was COVID. It's just that everyone around me assumed it was, because that's the power of having a virus with a marketing department. And this is the second such um, political pandemic. And the first one, as you may know, is HIV. And behind uh, both pandemoniums, pandemics, whatever you call, you have the same rogues gallery of people like Anthony Fauci, Deborah Birx, and basically a society that created, well, not in the sense as it was created in a lab, although we're not necessarily averse to that theory. We created a virus as a social issue, and this has had knock-on effects for for decades to come, because HIV is still an active area of research in multiple research institutions. And I worked in academic science for a couple of years, and it just occurred to me that hold on, I'm going to add Miguel to the stream. It just occurred to me that we've had active research in the sense of maybe thousands of man years worth of labor per calendar year on various disease categories, and we're nowhere near curing any of these diseases. It seems to be like science as we know it, uh, professional, public funded charity science that basically runs every um, major research institution throughout the Western world. Science seems to me to be nothing but a money pit. It's almost like mob backed labor, in that you have a problem, you keep pouring money into the solution, and the solution never gets fixed. And this goes back to a point that I was making in Social Galactic, and something that I mentioned to Eugenius. Um, I mean, it's uh, I basically kind of cribbed this from the movie Joker, and the line that I had in mind was, "Science is evil, and I'm tired of pretending that it isn't." So, gentlemen, any thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, um, yeah. I was. I know you're using science in general, but I had that epiphany with medicine, in particular, medical sciences, about 9 years ago. So I had really insane autoimmune conditions. My prognosis was I'd be dead at 26, and yeah. Anyway, they want the doctors and everything. They wanted to push me on biologic drugs that would cost like $100,000 a month, stuff like that. And I remember when I told the doctors that I had been seeing, I was like, yeah, no, I'm out. I'm good. And I embraced fasting, and my autoimmune conditions all went into remission. So it's so that's why when I think of cancer, when I think of the other stuff that all this money gets put into, um, I see it as nothing as a scam. Especially, I worked in building software for nonprofits. That was initially what my career started out as, and a lot of these foundations that gather money for cancer research, it's just one big giant scam. Like there's a lot of money being made in these foundations, in these quote unquote charities, and there is no and all that goes away if the actual solution to cancer is found. All that goes away. So there's no actual real incentive to actually cure cancer, and I suspect that the reason why cancer is so bad today isn't because lack of a medical treatment to what do you call it to get rid of it, but rather there's something that's been added to humanity in the modern day in the past 200 years that has resulted in like the cancer spike.
I excuse me, voice is out a little bit. I sounds. I mean, I don't doubt that at all. I think you're exactly right, Jose. I mean, there's there's no incentive for them to fix anything. Um, kind of like there's no incentive for the Republicans to ever pass laws which protect unborn. Uh, they need to keep the grift going because that's how they get fed. Um, I I actually think today I, w- I actually read the book Inventing the AIDS Virus. I forget what year I read it. Was it 93, 94, something right when it came out? And I have to credit that for giving me the initial skepticism regarding what's going on today. And it's obvious. I mean, you got the same main player involved with Fauci, but that book was a real eye opener for me. And it go. I don't know if you're familiar with that book, though. It's Dr. Peter Duesberg, and I think there was some contributions by Carrie Mullis as well. Um, it dealt with the whole uh, how they took a medical issue that was occurring and turned it into something more than it probably was, and how there's really not a lot of science behind it because uh, Koch's postulates, I think, when you're dealing with some kind of pathogen like that, you ought to be able to apply Koch's postulates to it. And of course, I don't remember all of what they are, but basically, they none of the stuff that they were doing relative to AIDS or the story surrounding AIDS and AIDS being caused by the virus and et cetera, made any sense relative to Koch's postulates, which is what they'd been applying for infectious diseases up until that time. And I think we wouldn't be in the situation we are now with COVID if we wouldn't have had the AIDS thing occur before, actually, because it. I think that's really what ushered in the the modern age, if you will, of uh, insane medical related research, grant spending, all that kind of stuff.
Eugenius, I just wanted to slow you down just for anyone. I don't think that anyone's listening, but in case anyone is wondering what Koch's postulates are. Now, I'm just reading this out of Wikipedia, which, again, this is something that you shouldn't necessarily trust. But the four postulates of Koch are: the microorganism must be found in abundance in all organisms suffering the disease, but should not be found in healthy organisms. The microorganism must be isolated from a diseased organism and grown in pure culture. The cultured microorganism should cause disease when introduced into a healthy organism, and the microorganism must be re-isolated from the inoculated diseased experimental host and identified as being identical to the original specific causative agent. So even from that list that may not be accurate, I think that we can see the problem with both HIV and SARS-CoV-2 regarding Koch's postulates in that we we are not necessarily able to isolate this um, disease microorganism, reculture it, or reinfect it with reinfect it into a healthy host, who in turn we can extract the inoculum from and infect another host. The primary problem, of course, is that both of these diseases, at least it's claimed, are viral in nature. And the thing about viruses is that you can't culture them unless you just so happen to have the cells that, excuse me, the cells that they're supposed to infect. And or at least I've glanced a bunch of these method papers for SARS-CoV-2, and um, they don't like I don't think that they're actually using the actual virus itself, but they're just using some sort of vector virus with the SARS insert and doing all sorts of these manipulations on the cell culture to produce uh, some sort of nucleic acid that, when sequenced, has the same sequence or the purported sequence of um, the COVID virus. So, um, well, I mean, tell us more, Eugenius, about what you've learned from this book that you read.
Well, you have to forgive me. It's been a while ago, and I don't have a copy of it still. I wish I had, because I've seen it's worth up to $500 or $600 now if you can get it in hardback. Um, the the real takeaways from it were, you know, the 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 disease, if you will, if you want to call AIDS a disease, it seems to strike very specific populations. That's one red
Mhm.
flag. Uh, if it's actually, caused by a virus, it shouldn't be discriminatory in the way in which it infects people. I say that perhaps maybe there's some kind of way that some genetic predisposition could lead to someone being infected or not, but we're not talking about a genetic predisposition when we're talking about AIDS. We're talking about it disproportionately affects active male homosexual populations in greater amounts. It also happens to be very hard hitting to people with hemophilia and African AIDS. That's a kind of another thing in and of itself. But when you look at the people hardest hit by it, there's nothing that's unique biologically other than male homosexual. But there's no reason why it would discriminately prefer a certain uh, party or another. Um, it doesn't make sense based on Koch's postulates, and so you have to pause and think and reason and ration that that really is probably not the reason why they're having these types of conditions.
Mhm.
And then the book went into great detail about, well, AIDS, when someone dies of AIDS, and this is the thing that's, I think, really parallel to it, is when someone died of AIDS, they didn't really die of AIDS. What happened is they died of an underlying uh,
Opportunistic infection.
exactly
Yeah.
coincident with there being antibodies of this adenovirus that was inside of them. And oh, by the way, we've never actually isolated this adenovirus. The only way we know that, or we think, or that we can prove that it was there, is that we find antibodies of it. And this virus is so strong and so deadly that we can't find it, but we can find the antibodies, which are the body's response to having fought it off, and doesn't make any kind of logical sense. And I think the main point is that when you start looking at adenoviruses, they're 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 commonly spread throughout, populations. A lot of people have essentially harmless viruses or antibodies to harmless viruses, relatively harmless viruses in their body,
Mhm.
and it just so happened they were able to find one that they could make coincident with some of these conditions, and it was kind of like it was a well, it was a very convenient disease for all kinds of reasons, I guess. One thing I think that's well, uh, it's curious, it's interesting. One of I think the greatest concentrations of biomedical research that goes on the pharmaceutical companies is concentrated there in South San Francisco.
Yep.
Uh, it's I don't know if it's the single largest area where pharmaceutical biomedical research occurs, but if not, it's probably in the top three. I'm guessing. Um, I'm,
Yeah, I think it's maybe even number two. And I can, well, I'm not going to go into any specifics, but having worked for a pharmaceutical contract research organization, uh, I can tell you that a ton of my service requests are coming from South San Francisco because it is the hub of uh, biotech right after Boston and also ahead of San Diego, where I live. There's a ton of biotechs here too. I never thought of it in terms of AIDS, HIV research, but it is very curious. And again, it's one of those things where, again, it's like uh, mob-backed union labor in that it's a source of income rather than a problem to solve. And I don't know if you've ever heard of Bruce Charlton, but he has a blog, and I think he's been linked by Vox Day a couple of times. But his whole thing is um, basically how the entire edifice of scientific research has been wholly corrupted because nobody cares about the truth anymore. They just care about funding. And something that has been thoroughly disgusting me during this job search. Um, I don't know if, well, I think you guys have seen it simply because you're both on Social Galactic, but um, I'm currently on unpaid leave because of my refusal to participate in the devil juice requirement. And yeah, something that has thoroughly disgusted me about pharma and biotech in general is that this pandemic is their baby. This pandemic is. Do you need to go, Eugenius?
um, yeah, that's probably my daughter and son. I need to go pick them up, but I'll do that and come right back. Okay.
All right. Yeah, we'll keep your seat warm, so to
Okay.
speak.
I'll,
All
I'll
right.
leave. I'll leave my mic on. Okay.
All right.
All right.
Okay. Oop, sorry. I'll just put you on. Well, okay. Yeah. So, yeah. Even in my current job, which I guess isn't really my job anymore, um, there are discussions about how such and such a client or such and such an opportunity is going to lead to X large amount of revenue because, quote unquote, it's COVID related. And, um, well, I mean, when you have a business that is built upon this sudden suddenly created business opportunity, or something that is uniquely poised to capitalize upon this suddenly created business opportunity, you're not going to go off message. You're not going to stop and think, hey, is universal masking such a good idea? Is it really such a good idea to create this apartheid caste system based on whether somebody believes our public health officials or not? Um, and again, we don't really have a topic for this stream, but when I talk about science being evil, I'm not talking about the business of observation. You know, the whole business of empirical study of the natural world and empirical study of the natural world, because um, a lot of science historians like to pretend that this all began with Isaac Newton, but it's been going on since, it has been going on since even um, centuries before Aristotle, and it has been uh, it's one of those things that had been independently practiced many places throughout the world: India, China, Persia. I think even in pre-Columbian America, some there was some basis of quote unquote science and observation. But what I'm talking about when I'm saying science is evil, it's not referring to that. Vox Day has a way of delineating the types of science in order to have in order to speak univocally about particular branches, so to speak. The words that he used are scientody, scientage, and scientistry. So I think scientistry is the practice of science by professionals. Uh, Scientody is the knowledge base created by science, and scientage is, well, the scientific method. Uh, but when I'm talking about evil science, what I mean particularly is this cargo cult worldview that has been specifically crafted to attack and, in the minds of people, destroy the truth of Christian revelation. Um, so, whenever there's this drama about the war between religion and science, Christianity is always the bad guy. Science, so called, is always the good guy. And it creates in the people a dialectic which I consider to be false, unless you delineate the dialectic as pro God and anti God. And science as we know it, science as in this popular executioner of divine revelation, is it is the I call it the operational epistemic principle of the modern day occult. And in fact, some of these heroes of science, so called, that we look at in history, like Isaac Newton and Giordano Bruno, are occultists. Newton, particularly, was obsessed with transmuting lead into gold, and Giordano Bruno was a hermeticist who, centuries before it became popular, popularized the idea that rotating that the stars have planets of their own, and there's a possibility that these planets are Earth-like planets. And yeah, he was. as you know, he got the crispy treatment from the Catholic Church, and I think that the church actually did the right thing there. But um, maybe it's just because I'm an old curmudgeon. Jose,
Well,
still there?
yeah. I had to briefly drop out because my wife and I are sick, as is her son with it's probably the Omicron, and she
Hmm.
also had a fall on her bike, so I've been taking care of her. Um,
Okay, well, that's
but yeah,
sweet. That's sweet of you.
hopefully, I find it amusing because I told her, "You're sick, don't do anything stupid." And of course, as soon as I, sleep, because I just need to sleep to kill this,
Mhm.
she does something stupid. So it.
Yeah, you know,
But huh?
when when I was sick, I noticed that if I take my vitamin stack before I go to bed, it really makes my body temperature spike. And so, what I learned later was that don't take D3 before you go to bed. Not a good idea. Uh,
Oh, okay.
s- so yeah, I'd say need if you need to take your vitamins first thing in the morning and do it at lunch. And uh, well, I never took melatonin, but that should help you go to sleep.
Huh. Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, I guess back to the earlier topic. For the past year, I've called science Anglo-Saxon voodoo.
Hmm.
That's mainly because I work as a data engineer, and so a lot of the stuff I'm building for the past several years of my life is spent building stuff for business intelligence people to build models to predict the future, etc. And I've long concluded that a lot of the stuff that I'm building stuff for is essentially borderline scrying. There's yeah, it's yeah. Anyway, it's just something I've noticed and I've concluded.
Hmm. Well, um, yeah, I want to do a deep dive into um, like the link between science and the occult, and I think we already have our leads in terms of Newton and Bruno. Um, there's a book out there. Uh, I'm just going to look it up on Amazon to see if this is the one that I should get. Well, I don't know. I have a bad habit of buying books and not finishing them. Uh,
I know the feeling. I'm reading 9 books right now, and I'm at most 2/3 through one of them.
mhm, yeah. The Outline of Occult Science. Oh, Rudolf Steiner. Yeah, he's a guy that comes up in these theosophical discussions. I guess he had this thing called anthroposophy. And that's the thing that when if I recommend Bruce Charlton, I do so with a bit of a yellow light because he's very interested in Mormonism and anthroposophy and Owen Bar- Owen Barnfield and a bunch of romantic thinkers that don't necessarily, well, I'd say not just not necessarily, but completely stray away uh, altogether from Orthodox Christian thought because, yeah, um, I don't know. I mean, I think that around the 19th century, there was a generalized, there was a generalized uh, lack of confidence in established religion in general, as much as Catholics and Orthodox like to deny it. But I mean, you see it in people like Tolstoy and the growing theosophical movement that is trying to get away from established religion and try to basically theosophy is something that I would describe as the 19th century precursor to the New Age movement. Um,
Yeah, I'd say at least in the Russian among the Russians they don't deny it because it's you have so many saints, at least within the Russian church, that specifically blame they lay the blame for the rise of Bolshevism on the embracement of theosophy and the other occultic movements in 19th century Russia by the elite.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I
So,
mean,
and
I
also
mean,
you had so many saints during the 19th century who said, because if this is not rejected, this will lead to the most, what is it, Saint Seraphim Sirach, this will lead to the most brutal judgment the world had ever seen. So
yeah, I don't think we've escaped that judgment. I don't think we're out of the woods there yet either. Um, and I've discussed, I mean, I've discussed on Pocho Holy Hour with I don't know if you know who Taco is, but
yep.
he was into the occult and then converted to Catholicism. I basically shared with him that I think that the Q movement of the past several years is basically the revival of occultism within the political right, because
Yeah,
uh,
I can
because
see
when
that.
I've read some of those drops, and they're very pro Age of Enlightenment, very anti-religion. Um, I mean, I mean, apart from the fact that Q mentions Archbishop Vigano, the thing was that I was a fan of Vigano until he was mentioned in a Q drop, because when I started reading between the lines of the things that he was saying, it was very Freemasonic in spirit. Uh, and yeah, I think something. Uh, I get the. Here's the thing: the Q folk have not disappeared. They're continuing to persist in their error, but I think it's because um, ultimately, I think that the purpose of the Q movement is to revive interest in the occult nature, the occult Christ supplanting nature of the American civic religion. Hmm.
Could be. I just know that it's we're not supposed to trust anything that's done in secret. So
Yeah.
that's yeah, I guess I think that's my interpretation of it. And also, I don't know as much about Vegano beyond what Vox has posted.
Right.
It's not really the circles I pay attention to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, now this is somebody that I really also wouldn't recommend listening to, but I think that he's been more insightful about it than Vox. But I think that Owen Benjamin has been right on the money with regard to a lot of these right occultist movements. Like, you know, I'm involved in the or I guess you could call it the medical freedom movement in my own city. But what I've noticed is that although there will be a lot of Christians, there um, it's like the entire movement is being it's being slidden or herded into a occultist way of thinking, because there's lots of talk about energies and vibrations, uh, and even more recently, General Michael Flynn was caught plagiarizing an entire speech um, from this New Age nutcase lady named Elizabeth Clare Prophet. Yeah, and I saw his speech and her speech side by side, and it was just 100% lifted. And um, gosh, I think I've strayed way off topic, but I don't even know what the topic is.
Well, I would say is it just means that it tells you that whoever it is that owns General Flynn is what do you call it? Up into the occult, because they don't write their own speeches. So
Yeah,
it's I'm just gonna say, just from personal experience. I studied international relations, political science. So I'll just say I know a lot of people who write these political speeches. Most politicians in this, actually in general, I mean, except for like dictators or strongmen, yeah, in general, politicians are not going to be writing their own speeches.
Yeah. Yeah,
They're written by the guys who put them there.
Yep.
well, welcome back, Eugenius.
Hey, sorry it took so long. I had to wait for something there. They had to restock a fridge or something in the meantime.
All right. You're in Texas or Kansas? Where is it?
I'm in Texas. I'm uh, just south of Austin. I used to live in South Austin, but moved further south to get more house for the money because all the kids. So I
Yeah.
live
Uh-huh.
in it's a small city called, well, medium-sized city called Kyle. So,
All right. That means I drive by your house all the time.
oh, where do you live at?
Well, I live in Round Rock, but I'm going. I travel a lot to all the different Orthodox communities in Central Texas. So there's some really good people in San Antonio, New Braunfels.
Okay.
So I drive through Kyle all the time.
Yeah. Yep.
Hmm.
We'll have to meet in real life then at some point.
Yeah, I know we tried. Didn't work out, but
All right.
would like to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I've met two social galacticians in real life. It didn't work out. Well, I mean, funny story is that they were trying to set me up with their sister-in-law, and we had our first date, and it went nowhere. But I mean, no harm because I'm in a relationship now, and I think it's going pretty strong. Um, It's just that I'm feeling a bit insecure because of my job situation, but then I have to remind myself, and she reminds me too, that I did nothing wrong. I stuck to my guns and just am experiencing the consequences of refusing to participate in an evil system.
Yeah, I can imagine it's pretty rough, especially being in that one, because I would have doubts about that industry surviving. Or there's going to be a lot of hemorrhaging going on, but you might emerge from it in a strong position, though. So
Yeah,
what's left of
that's
that industry?
that's true, but I mean, they've been doing great quarter after quarter because again, when you're a scientific testing company and the entire world is obsessed about taking tests, then you're basically sitting on top of a gold mine. Um, it's just though that I'm also one of the things that I'm not too optimistic about uh, is all of the well, let's just put it this way: the Canadian convoy to Ottawa, because I'm just thinking once you get there, what are you going to do? And they're already talking about we have to be careful so that they don't turn this into the January 6th of 2022 and false flags and all of that. But it's like the time to do something like this was 2 years ago or more than 2 years ago. And it's like, but the thing is, whoever would have taken kinetic action would have been demonized both by the mainstream media and the people who would erstwhile support them because um I don't know we've been we've been conditioned into thinking that the system works, and if you operate outside the system then you're a fed. But it's like our entire system of government was created from sedition, so it's like um, so it's like you know I'm going to make a tangent. Uh, so I heard I, I heard this speech by Chris Ferrara about um, our political system, which is based on the theories of John Locke, and he said that the tension in the American system, particularly at around the time of the Civil War, was the tension between the right of revolt and the right of free association. So it's like you get one rebellion, and then once that rebellion is over, it's the age of obedience. And so the North and the South were the North and the South were both operating out of Lockean principles. The South was operating out of the principle of rebellion, and uh, the North was operating out of the principle of consent of the governed. Um, and so, what is the tiebreaker between these two? Uh, this tension, and I think the tiebreaker simply is um, which side had the most toys, and the North did. And the thing is, uh, okay, I'm getting into another tangent here, but there seems to be in the political right now, a back to the land movement, which, I mean, it makes sense. It makes personal, local sense in that you want your resources to come as close to the local community as possible. But the thing is, when you're competing with an opponent that can source material from the farthest ends of the earth, and this opponent wants to kill you, you're not going to win. So it's like how I consider the Amish. If the United States government suddenly decided that the Amish were a target for persecution, they would disappear in a matter of months, because although they have numbers and although they have the ability to support themselves, they can't fight. So uh, I
Well,
get.
yeah, I I kind of want to unwind a little bit back to where you were, um, and then maybe come back to here. Um, I think we have this notion, and I'm probably wearing out what someone else has done before, but we have this notion that World War III is destined to be kinetic. Um, and I'm becoming more of the mind that it may not necessarily get there. World War III is definitely an information war, without a doubt, and we're in the middle of World War III right now. And as part of it being an information war, the realization that it is a world war is part of the fact that they've mastered how to deal with information. They know how to
Mhm.
deal with it such that we don't know that we're at literal war right now, right? I know that
Yeah.
sounds a little bit Q-ish, but that's not meant to be. Uh, and so, as such, with respect to the Canadian truckers, the real issue is we don't have the ability to control the information, or that's been the problem. And yes, gradually alternative media has come through. Of course, it gets censored, fought back against. Well, the specific issue related to uh, turning things over in Canada is more related to human nature and the ability to follow the herd. And because the control apparatus around there, the party in the war has control of the media and how information gets put out, and they have the ability to control it and throttle it. They've been unable, or they've been preventing most of the people there, the herd, from seeing that what they're proposing they need to do is not being accepted by a very significant amount of people. Because if they were to see that, and I say see that, I see that in the you take it in and you understand it and you know it, that kind of sense. They've had such effective control of the delivery of information, the indoctrination about how to interpret information. So they've been able to prevent the conceptualization that others out there dissent in Canada. And what this truckers rally is doing is it's accelerating and thrusting that control away from them. Why is that? Is because they've literally gone from one end of the country to the other with this cause, and along the way, the people that surround them begin to see, oh, there's someone who doesn't buy what they're selling. And as that thing slowly built, it's almost metaphorical. What do you call it? Going from one side to the other, picking up momentum, getting the people there that are being controlled by the current masters of the information's delivery and interpretation system.
Hmm.
They're no longer able, because they're physically seeing them and massing up, and it's just the ability for them to be able to remove any kind of concept that other people out there are not okay with what we're doing. That is falling apart, and that is why I think you should not be. Yes, we got to be worried about the kinetic aspect, because they will want to start a false flag. But the reason all these people are amassing together isn't to start a war. It's to show everybody else in Canada, you're not crazy. We are here. And as soon as they start to see it, it will wrap around and rapidly collapse,
Hmm.
because we are herd creatures. And the problem is, we know it's always been wise for us to make sure what we're going to do is congruent with what the group wants to do.
Okay.
And that is, you know, that's why they're like that. And that's what this truckers rally is doing, is it's flipping that around.
Right. Um, Another uh, dissenting take on the Canadian convoy is that um, the elites are allowing it because one of the effects of that is that uh, store shelves are going to be empty. And once Canadians starve, the CBC, the Canadian government, whatever, can lay the blame squarely on the shoulders of the truckers, and uh, you have you have all these people concentrated in the capital, and you can.
Well,
And here's the thing that is often unremarked with regards to Canada and the what I call the lesser Anglosphere in general, is that the societies there have fallen apart so critically that um, the government can't rely on uh, maintaining a society the old-fashioned way, just people getting married, having children. So much of the professional much of all of the working classes, from unskilled labor to professional classes, has to be imported. And the thing is, since I come from an immigrant background, I can tell you the immigrants, um and this is more I mean, I think the exception here would be overland Hispanic illegal immigrants. Immigrants generally will align with whatever power structure allowed them to come in the first place. And the power structure that enabled them to make this economic migration is almost always leftist, liberal, and globalist. So all that the Canadian government has to do is just import an entire village in from Mumbai and say, "Hey, these guys are bad. Kill them and take their stuff." And that's all that it will take. So I think that I think we you have two things going on here. First is that the convoy will create supply chain disruptions, which will create basically you have you have a entire army of heels who think that they're baby faces and in fact are self-created kulaks, and you have a vanguard that you can source from pretty much everywhere in the world and say these are the bad guys, take their shit, kill them. Eh, because when like, say I'm from the southern Philippines, I've always wanted to have a Land Rover, and uh, there's this there's this nice placement agency that will give me a six-figure job as long as I sit down, shut up, and don't question anything. Am I go As I am an immigrant going to care about the rights of the people that I'm displacing? No. I'm thinking about how how I'm going to chain migrate the rest of my family so that
Right.
they can be
Uh,
fat and happy. And yeah, this is
there
also
actually you caused me to realize something uh, in that what you were talking about there. The entire United States was populated for the most part, with the exception of blacks, by people with that exact same mentality. That's why they came here. And you say you're a recent immigrant. Well, Miguel is probably related to someone that maybe a couple generations back. I happen to be one that's related to six generations or five generations back. We're all like that. That's the mentality of America, is exactly what you described. And that's part of the normal, I think part of the non-Indian population of North America has that culturally embedded everywhere in that, because it's, well, to some extent, um, it has that kind of vibe in all of, let's say, the Canadian and northern half of Mexico up. It all has that as part of it. Um, and I guess my point was, it's not. You're talking about kind of how the execution, or what the elite who are running the country think will happen, and they're allowing it for that reason. They're allowing it though because they're arrogant, because they feel like they put this control mechanism of information in place, and it's theirs, and they've been manipulating it successfully for so long. There's no reason why it's not going to continue to work. And all the things you describe about how they'll make it look, and they're going to do this because of that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's what they plan to do, and that's what they're going to broadcast, right? And they know from past experience it's going to have this effect on the populace. That's all based on this underlying faith that their control mechanism of information and manipulation is still going to work.
I was going to say, quality people you bring in to do your will matter too. It's the United States doesn't have the opportunity to bring in a bunch of, let's say, like something some Chinese emperors have done in the past, bring in a bunch of Mongols who are very capable of fighting and can crush, rebel groups that you want to get rid of. That's if you want. The thing is, there is no, there is no equivalent of the Hun that the U.S. can bring in that's that capable and is would go along with their order slash rule. That just doesn't exist. Um, and the other part too is there's a limit. Even with immigration is war. Like there's a limit in terms of what the American elite can do to destroy the people they're in. Because even if people see like, hey, whoever happens to be in the United States at the current moment, the U.S. government is going to try to wipe out. People may not be so inclined to want to jump ship to move into a country where they're going to get wiped out. That would be that was the thing that I was thinking there. And also, yeah, there is a difference in mentality. A lot of people come here because it's the give me that. My mentality is a little different. I mean, the main reason where I'm at is primarily spiritual, but it was cool to discover that I am related to the guy who scouted out the counties, including Travis, who had mapped it for the first time.
Okay.
So that was cool to find out. So I do have a connection here. It's just at post that part of the family fled this area post American conquest. Actually, before that, but during the Revolutionary period.
Well, then
Um,
your ancestry is deeper than mine.
yeah, and
Yeah.
I didn't know about it so until
Yeah.
recently.
No, but I mean, that's all. Mine's all Eastern or Western European.
Hmm.
All.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. So I mean, and migration Western European immigrants, not the original stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah, and so that's what I mean by like there is a difference in mentality even with like, and I know you'd mentioned how uh, Sevison mentioned those from northern Mexico migrating here tend to migrate for a different purpose. Like I know people who they do have connections to different parts of Texas, New Mexico, etc., and they're intentionally trying to move in that direction. I know people who literally, they have the deeds for the land that used to be theirs. Like the original copies from like 200 years ago, and they want to, they specifically want to get that specific piece of land back, which I find to be really fascinating.
Wow.
But it's honestly when I look at what the regime is doing, the regime is running on fumes. They know it. That's why they're trying to go to Russia into a war right now because they know the
Yep.
longer they wait, the longer it's going to take, or we call it the worse off they'll be in their revenge war against Russia.
Well, they
They
need they need a shit show right now in a big bad way to get everybody focused on the shit show.
Exactly. And the other part too is their ability to false flag, I've noticed, has been getting weaker. The fact that people around me, normal people around me, are starting to recognize false flags. The fact that, I had an uncle who was drafted into, the Vietnam War, and he fully knows about the Gulf of Tonkin incident and everything. So I do have one of my mother's sisters married an American, like a heritage American. His family, his male ancestry came to the United States to New York when it was New Amsterdam back in this like 1640s. So it goes back a while. But of course, he wasn't Anglo-Saxon. They were Dutch heritage. But anyway, that part of the family, like that whole family line, like my cousins, they their dad, granddad, great granddad, great great granddad, great 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 granddad, all served in various like every American conflict. They're even descended from Lawrence Chamberlain, who's that guy in the movie Gettysburg and Gods and Generals. They're descended from him too, and it was their father who explicitly told my cousins that they were forbidden from signing up with the U.S. military. Because so if a guy like that, who's like a solid, historical, long-term American patriot, been in the actual like native New Yorker, like salt of the earth native New Yorker for centuries, not one of the, and also not a fan at all of how what the city's become relative to what it used to be. Who refuses to leave New York because of that, because that's his, that's been his family's home for 400 years almost. So if that guy realizes, wait a second, the feds are lying. So, and this is someone who, his ancestors blindly followed in the Civil War, the first round of the Civil War. They're running into problems with their ability to control the narrative.
I see. Well, my take on the whole Russia Ukraine conflict is I don't think it's even going to happen. Um, because for the first part, Ukrainians and Russians have been kind of living together since, well, maybe not under the happiest of circumstances, but Ukrainians are saying, yeah, there's Russians all over the East, and they've just been here since uh, the war in the Donbass, and it's cool, I guess. And number two, this is going to sound like heresy to Vox Day and his ilk, but I don't. I think that Russia is intimidated by a potential American response, but I guess to give the ilk more credit, I think the Russians realize that a hot war is going to be more uh, trouble than it's worth. So I think what they're counting on is that the Americans are going to do something stupid.
Well, the other thing too is they know the longer they wait, the better off they are. That's the that's the other part of it. they know the United States is in decline. It was funny. I was listening to the Duran podcast, and it was hilarious because some guy from China who apparently might be a higher up, because about the fiasco of the U.S. lost two F-35s in the South China Sea,
Uh-huh.
and this guy actually did a super chat in Hong Kong currency, and literally said, like, those planes are such crap. We're not even going to try to look for it. It's just, which
Oh,
yeah, I think
that's false flag. The second I heard it, we're about to give a cover story for why the Chinese know about everything that we know, all of our military
Hmm.
equipment.
yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the F-35 is like the cancer research of the military, in that, like, just going in the earlier part of the stream, it's not something that is meant to ever be solved. It's just a funding black hole.
No, I can even tell you from engineering standpoint. Like I remember seeing the engineering specs for or the engineering goals for the plane. So they wanted to make a plane that is excels at being an air superior fighter, at being a close air support plane, as well as being perfect for what do you call it? Taking off aircraft carriers, being a naval a naval plane, and all
Hmm.
these three things are mutually exclusive. Like there's just a close air support and air superiority fighter. Like close air support, you want a plane that can go low to that goes low to the ground, that's slow moving, so that it can spend as much time as it can, raining down bombs, etc., on a target without having to do multiple passes. But with air superiority for an air superiority fighter, want that thing to be super fast, super agile, etc. And just in terms of like wing shape, to for those two different things, it's impossible. It's literally impossible. Like there's a reason why oh yeah, it's not called the Thunderbolt. What's that? It's the Warthog. That thing is a piece of engineering beauty. It's got super wide wings, lots of place to store bombs, missiles, etc. Plenty of stuff for close air support. Can move real slow, close to the ground. It can provide constant air support for troops on the ground. But that thing would be a terrible air superiority fighter. It's the F-35 from the beginning was designed to be. It was just a grift, and
Uh-huh.
that's as you mentioned before. That's what science has become. It's a grift. What is the medical field? It's a grift. What is the university system? It's a grift.
Yeah.
Pretty much everything in the United States is a grift. I forget who is it who said first that meritocracy inevitably becomes ruled by con men, because you don't hire the best for the job, you hire the person who's best at selling themselves for the job. So in the end, in a meritocracy, you end up with rule by con men, and that's what the United States is.
Yeah, that's basically the same point that Bruce Charlton was making about the scientific establishment, in that the most successful professors are not the ones who are the best scientists, but
Hmm.
the ones who can sell uh, the idea of what they're doing best. And in fact, one of the places that I interviewed, I didn't that they killed the interview process dead in its tracks because I was being too honest with them. I think I talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and that this company doesn't have a vaccine mandate, but I watched their TED talk, and basically their chief scientific officer is a psychopath who wants to play God. And so back in 2018, he was talking about a new outbreak in China of this respiratory pathogen. But don't worry, our synthetic biology platform created a vaccine in a matter of minutes, and we stopped this pandemic dead in its track. And of course, when you go to this company, I'm just going to put it up there because I want to give them bad press. Um, Basically, the splash page was that they created a synthetic genome for the Omicron variant, and it's like, uh, I mean, I'm just bewildered at all of this because
Somebody leaked the script.
of something like that, but um, it's just putting the cart before the horse, and it's like, um it's like one of those things where you create a solution. It's like you create a solution before the problem even exists, and I don't know, I don't quite know how
Well,
to.
that's American manufacturing culture, or
Yeah.
it's, hey, we got this thing. How are we going to sell it? And so you're always approaching the the thing secondarily, the marketing part of it. You
Hmm.
have this thing and you figure out, hey, we know it's a great thing. We just got to figure out how to communicate to everybody that's a great thing.
Yeah.
That's the way it is.
Hmm.
And when you're talking about scientists, like again, individual basis, but you got to know. It's funny what honest ones will tell you. Like I was talking with uh, one of the chief science guy at the company I work at, and of course he would never have his name on this because, as he put it, this would destroy his reputation, etc. But we were talking about cancer, etc. Because I was discussing, fat. He was interested in what kind of fasting, Orthodox people do, etc. And so we were talking about cancer and such. And what he said is, crazy thing is that fasting is about 10 times more effective than what you call it, um,
Chemotherapy.
chemo.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more effective, 10 times more effective than chemo, and chemo has a 97% failure rate. And So anyway, I've seen family members go through chemo. I've seen two, and I will never ever go through that. It's I'm gonna take the what Saint Paisios said. If you get a cancer diagnosis, God be praised. You know when you're gonna die, so you can get everything. You can get your soul ready.
Hmm.
That's essentially my plan if I get cancer. So
Do you
Yeah.
live in Do you live in fear that you're going to get cancer?
no, that's the other part too. So
Yeah.
No, I don't. I don't mean that that you don't trust God about it. But I mean, does it cross your mind? Because for years, I was always worried about when I would hit my 42nd birthday, because that's the day my grandfather died of a massive heart attack, and they say I'm a dead ringer for him.
mhm. Yeah. What I will tell you is heart attacks didn't exist prior to the invention of seed oils. So I'm not saying they cause heart attacks, but literally there were no recorded heart attacks in human history or medical history until seed oils were introduced as a food. Um, so yeah, it's the fact is, given your dad, you probably you share the same genetic markers, same risk factors that you inherited from him. But if that is something that's on your plate,
Well, maternal grandfather. Well,
yeah.
it's not. I mean, I'm 51 now. I'm 9 years past it.
Mhm.
Hmm.
So, I, I mean, granted, I don't get enough exercise. I'm overweight. You know, have the occasional drink. I'm probably following all the same patterns. I probably should be worried. Psychologically, though, for some reason, I'm past it. Though I feel okay. It's. I'm not. There's something else going on. I can breathe a little bit, right?
Mhm.
Um, and the longer it goes between now and 42, the less I even think about that. That it's past me, and it's just it's the bigger bubble of, hey, you need to take better care of your health in general,
Mhm.
uh, or you're going to be the one directly responsible, not your genetics or whatever.
Yeah.
That's what I'm in. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think the easiest way to get into a healthier diet is just eat one less meal a day. That's basic intermittent fasting. Um, and I find, I mean, one the more like fasting is one of those things where the more you do it, the better you get at it. Um, and it's like, um, you learn when you start limiting your calories, you start physically learning the difference between real hunger and psychological hunger. And I think the first 24 hours, maybe even 48 hours, is just you have to learn to you have to learn to not give in to uh basically
The psychological.
your withdrawals from, I guess, sugar or whatnot. Well, it was sugar for me because for like the first 2 decades of my life. I was addicted to breakfast cereals uh, and junk food. Yeah, so I'm not very fit myself, but you know, once you the thing is when you start building one good habit, I find that it's best to take on as many as possible. So you start eating less, you start some sort of exercise regimen, and you also drink more water. I'm on the I don't know where anyone stands on the water debate, but I say that getting more water is better than less. And also getting better sleep. But I again, I don't know where I personally stand on that debate because uh, when I was eating clean and working out twice a day, I can get by on 4 hours of sleep. And it's not because I was trying to sleep less. It's just that I sleep 4 hours and my body tells me I'm done.
Oh, I'll say is sleeping is good. I'm a huge fan.
Hmm.
Yeah, me as well. Especially for some reason around 3 o'clock when I should be working on something. No.
Hey, that's the natural siesta hour.
See,
Exactly.
And
That's
in
when my
fact,
son goes to sleep, and I like to sleep at the same time.
yeah, and I'd say one of the one of the benefits of work at home culture is that people, even if they don't admit it, I'll admit it, is that they're rediscovering this ancient Hispanic practice of sleeping in the middle of the day.
It is absolutely epic and wonderful.
hey, I gotta say something, Jose. Or I'm kind of just blown away. Um, I mean, I'm what my ancestry is primarily from, I guess, the German and whatever migration, 1865,
Hmm?
and I kind of grow up thinking I don't know what the culture that I'm used to, um, Kansas, North Texas, kind of the stuff I grew up in. Um, it I don't how do I say it? When you go to look for answers from places, when you're trying to figure out, say you're still kind of have some immigrant in you, you're trying to figure out who should I be following, or who should what kind of cultural spirits or essences should I be bringing in to me to internalize, to operate by. And well, I've grown up in a culture that primarily tells me to look towards what happened in New England, or the way the people outside of probably more toward the east. But in listening to you, I realize that the group of people I came from immigrants, were probably looking at the wrong culture all along, and they should have been looking at the northern Mexican culture, or whatever, because they've been here longer, way longer than many of the other folks that you're looking to for cultural references. And anyway, just I don't know if I'm explaining this, but it just blows me away. I've never realized that I've always inflectively looked toward the east, I guess,
Mhm.
because that's kind of culturally how it was embedded in me. When in reality, what's been going on further south has been the reality for the space I've lived in longer than the one I'm looking at, to try and figure out how do I interpret everything. And I didn't realize that until now. It's just like, no, I need to really understand
So,
the southwest, the real southwest culture, or
sure.
whatever.
You said you had German in your background too.
Well, yeah, German, Irish, apparently a little bit more British than we realized.
Mhm. Yeah, I know because in terms of waves of immigration in Texas from when the Americans started coming in here, they brought in Germans, they brought in Czech in particular. There are a
Well,
couple Czech towns.
by the way, all mine went to Kansas. Um,
Okay.
and on my mom's side, I think some went into Indiana before they skipped to
Mhm.
Nebraska. So
What I will
that's
say,
the stock I'm from.
yeah, what I will say is there was definitely German, because Spain has always had a long habit of mestizaje, but they did bring in Germans at some point after Charles was Holy Roman Emperor. There were Germans who settled in Mexico, and that's why like northern Mexican ranchero music, a lot of northern Mexican music, you hear a lot of. I think it was Steve Saylor who joked that Mexican music seems to take they tend to be the latest greatest hits from 18th century Danube, from the Danube,
Sorry.
and that's why that's why you have such a heavy presence of the accordion and other stuff. Like
Yeah.
um, there was a absorption of Germans here. My son's godfather, so his family has been here directly like the whole time for the past 450, more than that, years. Like like they've been here since the beginning, since people crossed over from El Paso. But some point in his history, when the Germans first settled here, that the Americans invited in, apparently for some reason, it was at a point where the Germans weren't, at least in what is now Texas. The English didn't want to intermarry with the Germans, and the specific Germans that settled where his family's traditionally from, they were all related to each other, so they had to find spouses for their kids, and the English wouldn't marry them, so they intermarried with the Mexicans. So you have Mexicans running around. So he looks like your stereotypical pocho. He's not pale faced like me, but his last name is like explicitly German,
Uh-huh.
and so you have Mexican areas in Texas that go back a long time. It's Yeah, and the thing is, like, if you're going to stay permanently in the Southwest, it's good to know the history there. Like, I
Yeah,
guess,
because well, you're right. I'm not from that. I'm from that later wave of Germans and Irish,
Hmm.
and I guess it's probably the same thing for both of them. The proper English didn't want to have anything to do with either of those, so hey, they ended up getting after it, and that's what I'm a product of the
Yeah.
Irish and Germans getting after it in the plains of Kansas, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, and
Hmm.
it's not as deep, and it's probably all regulated through kind of they came through New York and on their way, and they're always looking where they left to get their inspiration when as those people spill down into Oklahoma and then into North Texas and then like myself bleed all the way into Central Texas.
Yeah,
I'm in a different culture completely, really.
I was going to say like I'd say one error with looking to like the East, especially New England. So people talk about the phenomena of white flight, and the thing is, white flight is a feature of Puritan culture. So the Puritans themselves were the first example of white flight. They literally, they left England because the English were insufficiently English. They wanted to practice their version of Christianity that was Jewish in nature and more anti-Catholic than what existed in England. And so they left. They went to the New World, and you look in the history of the Puritans. They're constantly fleeing. They don't stand their ground. They don't put roots down, at least not intentionally so. They have a habit of always running away. And so this habit of running away from the problem is something that's carried over into modern American culture with the phenomena of white flight. And I compare that, like if I just do just comparison to my son's godfather's family. So they had a bunch of family members who were lynched after the U.S. conquered, to annex Texas, etc. And but they stayed. They had they made more babies, and they're still here and they're still going. It's that attitude of fleeing, even like the attitude of like people fleeing California. Like I get why people flee California, but I know people like I have a cousin who married an actual like a California, like an actual woman descended from
Hmm.
the original Californians. And no matter how bad things get, no matter how third world California turns into, her family's not going to leave. They're going to stay their ground. They're going to wait it out until the contradictions of the current system that's ruling Africa or California collapses. And after it collapses, they want to build what they had locally again.
Hmm.
And I think they're going to get their shot. I actually think in the short run, I actually think things in California will turn around quicker than things in Texas because of the demographics there. But that's a different story.
Yeah, Noel. Both Noel and I are long on California, but for different reasons. I think that he has too much of a surface level um understanding of the way California society works. It's like the salaries are the highest here, but yeah, but the cost of living is the highest too. That I'm long on California too, but simply because um, the way that I see it is, yes, California is getting worse and worse and worse, but the thing is, culturally and demographically speaking, the Californians who have decided to plant their roots here and have roots that go all the way back to maybe, say, I don't know, the 19th century, or perhaps the refugees from the the early 20th century Mexican upheavals. Pick one. There's so many of them. The ones who have, yeah, the ones who have roots here and have basically planted themselves and said, we're not leaving, are not going to leave. And the thing is, you can't really threaten them economically because they're already in an economically precarious situation. And the thing is, when you're poor, connections matter a lot more than money. So the reason why I'm long on California is that uh, the people who are just here to make a buck are going to GTFO, but the ones who can't leave or have decided not to leave are just not going to leave. But it's going to be up to them whether they want to protect their society or not.
I
So
think they're going to leave, and the reason I think they're going to leave, and this is a man fantastic conversation, by the way. I think they're going to leave because the reason everything's so expensive in California is everyone's flocking to where the money is, which kind of reaches back to the first thread of the topic, if you will. But it's biomedical pharmaceutical stuff that's pumping money, and it's the tech industry, and then it's the movie industry. And every one of those three, just for whatever reason, I feel like is about to be completely destroyed,
Mhm.
implode, and collapse. And when that happens, there won't be this insane desire to go to California to get. Everyone will leave. Everyone except the people you're talking about that have historical roots in that area. They'll be
yeah,
the ones who stay, and yeah, they will win because
yeah,
all the crap will move out.
right.
And
But of course, it'll be up to them to protect their economy. And I think as long as the American empire is exists, then there's always going to be a threat because, um, well, I live in California right now, and it's basically ground zero for all these financialized economic sectors that are wholly predatory. So I think what's going to happen is, um, I think that, I mean, simply because of demographic changes and cultural changes, California is going to Mexicanize, but I don't. But but the only way that you can see that as a bad thing is if you are so attached to the idea of the glitz and glamour and all of the money flowing into California. And I mean, before the Americans took over California, the entire economy consisted of ranches and haciendas. And the thing is, that is that is actually perfectly scaled with the sort of um, living and lifestyle that California can provide. And it's like you could think of you could think of just California back then as Texas with a Pacific coastline and much better weather.
I was going to say, to bring it to the geopolitical thing, because I've been doing some research into the Russian colonization of Alaska, but at Puerto Russo, the Russians tried to set up a colony in California because of the fact that it was so easy to grow stuff in California. Like, California's meant to be a breadbasket. Like, that's what it's designed for, and that's what it'll go back to being. All the other stuff, like all the financialization stuff, all that'll collapse
Hmm.
But it's the people, and this is the other part too. Even the agricultural sector of California is distorted because of how their water system works. So they're wasting water on almonds and stuff like that. Whereas that land should be used for cattle. So in effort to make everyone's almond milk, the people who are trying to make everyone vegan, they're making meat more expensive and replacing it with almonds that are even worse than meat as far as environmental impact goes.
Yeah, well, I mean, uh, there certainly we can have a discussion about agricultural misallocation, but generally, I've made the drive from NorCal to SoCal. Maybe I've lost count how many times uh I've lost count how many times I've made it. But once you get into the Central Valley, you forget that California is a blue state, because you see a lot of signs about Congress, a lot of signs that say Congress created water crisis. So I think water management is in an absolute shambles in the state. If
Well, they
I
can't
think,
manage it though.
yeah,
That's the thing. That's Jose's point.
yeah, the
It's not designed to be this massive population center. It's meant to
right,
be a breadbasket. You're absolutely right.
yeah, but I think part of the water mismanagement is that they dump tons, they they dump tons of fresh water into the ocean because environmental reasons, or because I don't know, they're just idiots or corrupt. But
It's all
I
three.
Yeah,
okay, yeah, so
that's one time you do get all three.
yeah, so yeah, I mean California is going to be poorer, but it will have an economy that again is human scaled. And I don't know if this means they're going to expand their agriculture. I mean, if the agriculture is going to shift from fruits and nuts to uh, livestock. But I think that there is a chance that that could happen. I mean, it happened in the beginning. We were California was mainly growing horses and cows, and I mean, you know what? Actually, to be quite honest, Argentina and Brazil are the best. I think that they're the top beef producers in the entire world. So there must be something to the Iberian genius about raising cattle.
No, there is. Like, it's funny when someone was a farmer, or one of the guys on Social Galactic got me onto Joel Saladin and his
Oh
mob
yeah.
grazing techniques. And I remember actually looking at, so what is his mob grazing techniques? And I remember looking at him like, wait a second, this is just an American who's wrote a book on how to raise cattle the same way that llaneros in Venezuela and Colombia raise their cattle.
Mhm.
Except, he does a little more high tech. He replaces trained dogs with electric fences and solar panels. So it's like, I'm just looking at some like, wait a second. I looked at that history, and it's because Joel Saladin's dad had bought land down in Venezuela back when Venezuela was, a first world country and super wealthy, like actually wealthier than the United States. Apparently, they fled the United States during the Depression to Venezuela because Venezuela was the fourth wealthiest nation in the world at the time. But that's a different story. But yeah, so they bought land out there. They started running cattle, and then his dad and him learned how to raise cattle there from the llaneros. And they simply took, when they left Venezuela and went back to the States, when the States recovered, the 50s, boom time, etc. They took those techniques with them, and they were using them here in the States. And now they're teaching them to, other American ranchers. And it's like, whoa, this is mind blowing. And I'm just sitting here thinking, like, this is how everybody's been raising cattle in Colombia, Venezuela, Argentina, Mexico for forever, and like Andalusia for the past since the Roman Empire. Um,
Well, what is that method of raising cattle?
so
I
essentially, you get all your cattle to be in a very tightly packed mob, so they all move together in a grazing pattern. You mark out your fields, and you cycle your cattle through each location. So you have you take a giant field and you cut it down into 1 day's worth of grass for the cattle. You mob them together. Historically, or how they do it in Hispanidad, you use dogs that keep the cattle where they're supposed to be. In the case of Joel Salatin, they actually mark all that out with electrical fencing, and they just have the cattle move between each of the fenced in areas. So that way you force all the cattle to be together. They chop up the ground with their hooves, etc. They all eat and they all pee and crap on that same spot of ground. Then you move them, and then however many days it takes till that piece of ground, the grass goes back to a certain level. You bring the cattle back and they eat it again. So when you move your cattle like that, you end up building topsoil on the ground, and you can add like 6 inches of topsoil in 7 years. It's literally carbon sequestration, and you're taking carbon out of the air. You're building it into top quality soil, which you can then grow stuff on. And this has just been the standard way all this money that has done cattle forever. And it was kind of mind-boggling to me that to Americans, this is like a brilliant new concept that they didn't know about, which I find to be kind of hilarious. And Joel does give credit, like to the Venezuelans who taught his father. So it's and the good news is it means that the damage America did to the Midwest as well as the Southwest with the stripping of 6 feet of topsoil, that can be rebuilt using cattle. Actually, the only way it can be rebuilt is with cattle.
It'll take a couple of generations though, but how much shit it takes to make topsoil, I think yeah, this is like an agricultural version of turning lead to gold.
Well, yeah, exactly. But the other part of it too, which I find to be hilarious, is your typical Janeiro. These are guys. They say like the average IQ of Hispanidad is like what 82 or 84. I think it's 84. Yeah, like at least the guys I knew in Colombia, like these were not the brightest bulbs. They're much closer to 70, and they're engaging in practices that maintain their soil. These guys with an IQ of 70, and in America you have these 115 IQ agricultural engineers who design very clever methods to maximize yields out of the ground, and in the end, it destroyed the topsoil. So much for higher intellect being a universal good.
Yeah. Speaking of which, there were a lot of efforts to um, ease the famines in 19th century Europe with corn, um, and they all failed because one thing that the Europeans were unaware of is that in order to maximize the bioavailability of the nutrients in corn, you have to treat it with lye. It's a process. You might know this process as nixtamalization. So it's basically taking ash and using it, and then turning the ash into lye, and then using the lye to process the corn so that they can get all of the, I think it's niacin or thiamine, out of the germ, well, so some part of the corn. And the thing is, because the corn that was imported into Europe was mechanically separated, they were not getting all of the nutrients that were available. So a lot of the people suffered, I think it's pellagra. So I think the whole world needs to give uh, the Hispanics and the Amerindians a lot more credit.
I think it's going to happen just out of nature.
Mhm.
Yeah. There's something.
Yeah, I was listening too. It's you're definitely welcome in the Southwest Eugenia Spare. So don't feel like you got to run.
No, I don't think it's just the realization that I'm just an immigrant family as well too, and
Mhm.
trying to figure out what I want to fit in and thrive, and you just carry this. You carry this image of things from it's really heavy where you kind of grew up in your formative years, and what I've picked up, the story that's been sold to me about how to do it is it's off. It's off because it's referencing all these things that have nothing to do with the area in which I'm in, and I need to be looking or finding the authentic what are the people that have been there the longest, or that are there now, that are descendants from the people that have been there the longest? That's the thing.
Hmm.
How do they view the world? Because
Yeah.
that, in that particular space, is really the reality. It may not be it at that moment, but that's where it's headed,
Hmm.
because those people are tied geographically there, and they're not going to leave. They're going to stay regardless. And then,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and although the thing is, the Spanish influence was there first, and I think it hit the hardest because one of the most important lasting contributions of Spain to the Southwest and the Midwest is the horse. And it's like, um, you have this people that were never introduced to horses to, and in a matter of a short couple of centuries, they became the best light cavalry since the Mongols. So it's like, um, and it's, I mean, it's not, these are not like Hispanics, so to speak, but they were peoples influenced by Spain just purely through the introduction of the horse.
Now, the introduction of the horse is really interesting because I've been doing some reading of different Spanish history books, and it's funny because people on Social Galactic be like, "What's the book you're getting this stuff from?" And I'll tell them, but the problem is there's no English translation. But
yeah,
the example of the thing is in the case of the horse. So there are a lot of reasons why Spain brought in far fewer slaves than the United States, but the horse was one of them because when the Spanish first showed up, there are no horses here, and horses were in high demand among the Indians because of just how labor saving they are. You look at agricultural practice by the Inca prior to the arrival of Spain. So people will be like, "Oh no, Spain was cruel because they charged their taxes in the form of labor." It's like, yeah, like you would work for the Spanish crown for 1 month of the year. Right now, with my taxes, I work 4 months of the year for DC. So yeah, the Spanish were so brutal. But the fact is, overall leisure time skyrocketed for the Native Americans when the Spanish came because of the horse, the mule, the animals that could bear loads. So the Amerindians, especially the Inca, the Maya, the Mexica, they had these very advanced, about as advanced as you could get without any serious beasts of burden. And that's why they didn't really have anything with the wheel because they didn't have animals that could pull stuff that were on wheels. And with the horse and the mule, they completely transformed how they did agriculture. That drastically increased leisure time among the Mara Indians. And the other part too, where how it relates to slavery. So slavery was in terms of financial standpoint, still profitable to do, but it was more profitable for a merchant to bring in horses from the old world than it was to bring in slaves because there was no horses. By the time the British showed up and they were doing their thing in Jamaica and the Deep South, horses were already plentiful throughout the New World because of Spain. And so, it was just it was the next thing, the most profitable ship would be human slaves. That's the first part of it. So that's part of why Spain brought in so few to begin with. And then, of course, Spain, banned slavery in 1512 de jure, and then de facto really cracked down and enforced it in 1542. So prior to 1512, there were the most shipping tonnage that could have been used for slaves was being used for horses and other animals that were more
quick
profitable.
quick question there.
Sure.
Did the Spanish ban it for the moral reasons, or do you think it was actually more of their awareness of the economics of it?
It was moral. So if you look, if you're talking about like the new laws or the laws of Burgos, it was a moral thing because they had a huge debate. Vox actually, what do you call it? He based his Summa Helvetica because do elves have souls? There was a huge that's based off of an actual debate that happened with Spain where they were trying to debate. So these people in the New World, do they have souls? Are they human? Are they people we need to be preaching the gospel to? That was the thing that was being hotly debated after Columbus discovered these people and brought some of them back to Spain. And many of the arguments that Vox alludes to in that book, in Summa Helvetica, is lifted almost word for word from those debates that led to the laws of Burgos and the new laws. At the end of those debates, the Spanish crown, even stronger than the Spanish church, concluded that I mean, that They needed to missionize the Indians. That the Amerindians were humans. They had souls, and they needed to
Hmm.
hear the gospel, and that's what led to the ban of slavery.
So there, I'm just wondering. I always, the cynic in me assumes there's always going to be some recognition of the economics of it, and from what you described, the horse is clearly better economically than human beings.
Yeah, for
From what?
the first 30 years, but once you get past 1540, especially, human slavery would be much more valuable because the
Okay.
biggest, the most lucrative, the most lucrative stuff to grow in the New World was sugar, and sugarcane is perfect for chattel slavery, and that's why even though Spain had islands that could produce sugar, like Cuba, the Canaries, and Puerto Rico, and some of the Shield Islands, they were never huge sugar producers the way that the English were, because the English were willing to bring in slaves and work them to death in Jamaica, or the Portuguese in Brazil. So there was a sugar production in the Spanish colonies, but it wasn't anywhere to the same level of scale as those two other colonial empires had. And so most of the wealth of what was New Spain, it wasn't from gold, it wasn't from mining or even agriculture. It was simply from trade, from the trade between China and Europe. Because taking stuff when doing trade with China, you could go around Africa and have to deal with Muslim pirates, or you go straight from Spain to Mexico, and then from Mexico to the Philippines, the entire time being protected by the Spanish Armada. And that's where the real wealth of New Spain came from, and that's why New Spain itself, like excluding the rest of the empire, the GDP of New Spain was like 70% of all of the world's wealth, which is
Hmm.
crazy to think about. Like, because before then, before the Spanish Empire, China was the wealthiest part of the world. That's where most wealth was. Then suddenly, 70% of all GDP is in New Spain. Mexico City was far wealthier than Madrid, even when it is the irony. Mexico is much more European now than it was 250 years ago. Because after the revolutions, after Mexico broke off, you had a lot of internal conflicts in Spain. So you had mass migration from Spain into Mexico, people fleeing to Mexico because Mexico was better off than Spain. And you also had migration of Germans and others, etc., that came into Mexico. Mexico is much more European now than it was 200 years ago. And so, like at the time of 1700, when Mexico City built the first modern sewage treatment plant, or the first sewage treatment plant, not just a sewage system like the Romans had to get sewage out of the city, but to actually treat it before dumping it back into nature.
Mhm.
The city was still overwhelmingly Amerindian, which blows my mind looking into it. Yeah.
And what you got when you were talking about that, it kind of made me realize we desire, I think, this sustainability kind of culture, or where things can
Hmm.
be sustainable, and that's really kind of that's the Spanish influence. That's the Spanish way more so than the other pervading thing coming from through New England and English is one of, we're going to go in there and we're going to figure out how to get the most out of this no matter what,
Yeah.
and focus, and then move on. And it's just that kind of culture has to always go find a new host site, after,
Yeah.
because they're not approaching it um, in a long term kind of style of thinking. And so just that makes me generalize and think broader is I need to really focus on the Spanish culture in this area. The I need to learn more Mexican history for sure,
Hmm.
because if I want to stay in this area, the, this wave of just kind of mentality of usurping things and moving on and maximizing and doing all, that's about to die, because it eventually it feeds on itself and grows, metastasizes, and collapses.
Yeah.
And that's really essentially the U.S. government right now is the culmination. It's just how it ends up going. When that goes away, what's going to be left is still that Spanish influence, where they looked at things longer term, or
Yeah.
work.
Well, I wouldn't have too rosy of a view of Mexican history because um, as much as their history is more humane than that of Anglo America, or they made things that are built to last more. They also drank of the poison of liberalism in the 19th century, and
Well, yeah.
one of the things that I find a bit ironic is that all of the missions in California were basically stolen by the Mexican government, and uh, once America signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, the Americans, those awful, awful Protestants, actually reverted the missions back to the they returned the missions back to the Catholic Church. So it's like it's not all
No, I don't
tequila
mean
and
to. I don't mean
roses.
to. Hopefully, I didn't sound like I was trying to idolize it. I just
Hmm.
want to understand.
Hmm.
And to me, that's the thing for me is I want to know how they thought. And
Hmm.
yeah, there's going to be propaganda and all throughout history, and but trying to get to the root of what they were really doing, and because
Yeah.
that's the embedded culture in the physical geographic area that I live,
Well,
and I don't want to leave here.
yeah,
I
I
was going
don't.
to actually say, because you live in Central Texas, so the interesting thing is part of the reason why, they say the official story is Mexico wanted to bring in Americans here to settle here to prevent the issues they were having with the natives. The part that gets dropped is some of those natives, like the Apache, led by Geronimo. Geronimo, his name literally Geronimo. He was a baptized Catholic. He was a fanatical anti-Mason. His father was loyal to the Spanish crown in the Revolutionary Wars. So many of these native tribes were loyal to the Spanish crown. They absolutely hated the Mexican revolutionaries, as well as the Tejano population, or what is now the Tejano population. Many of their ancestors were also anti-Mason. And so the Mexican Masonic Republic had a huge issue of this expansive territory filled with people who were not fans of Masonry and were devout Catholics. So that's why they invited Americans in, but they didn't invite in just any Americans. They invited in, Stephen F. Austin and all these other guys who were all Masons. What do you call it? The irony of being like Houston and Sam Houston and Santa Anna, who fought each other. They're both brothers in the same lodge. So it's like so it was intentional. It was actually an attempt by the Mexican Masons were using immigration as a tool of war to replace the population of Tejas with a population that would be more amenable to Masonry. They didn't expect, though, that they were under the delusion that these Americans would be more loyal to the Masonic ideals than they would be to their own ethnos. And of
Uh
course, what
huh.
what Mexican Masons fail to understand is that within the Masonic construct or system, Hispanos are at best third tier players. You're never going to get invited into the WASP or the Anglo Jewish top ring of the Masonic system. So when you look at the fall of New Spain, similar to it's bound up with the Masonic movements of the 18th century and into the 19th. You had especially among the Criollo class, a lot were looking to America. They liked how in America, you had this racial hierarchy that they wanted to adopt. And that's the irony. It was a Romanian lady I know. Her husband's a Mexican fellow, and she said when a Mexican man becomes a Mason, he starts pretending like he's white. He starts pretending like he's an Anglo-Saxon, or a Roman, or an Anglo-Roman, as she put it, instead of embracing the identity he actually has. And it's a very interesting phenomenon. And that's why Mexico has been so what's the word I'm looking for? What do you call it? Not functioning. It's been repeatedly, multiple civil wars, um, you know, and just not a functioning country given what it was before. Like when it had a king, it was the wealthiest it was the wealthiest region in the entire world. Once they got rid of their king, they literally lost everything. And Mexico is going to continue to flounder and not amount to anything until they return back to the apostolic faith and back to monarchy, because that is the
Hmm.
only way to make Mexico work.
You know, the way that you described how the Mexican government used the Anglos to suppress their enemies, it reminded me a lot of how Song Dynasty China used the Mongols to oust Jin, and
Hmm.
uh, in return, what the Mongols wanted was they wanted to conquer China, and that's exactly what happened. So this was one of those blunders that cost the people trying to do the scheming very dearly.
Mhm. And to be frank, I when I look at the past 200 years of history between the United States and Hispanidad, the fact is the Hispanic elite chose Masonry. I mean, there was a fight against it. The level, this is, I guess, for a genius to know some of the history because of given where you and I both live.
Yeah.
Um, so the Americans' Revolutionary War looks like a skirmish compared to the Spanish Wars of Liberation. The like Mexico alone had like 400,000 dead, like within that region. The Spanish-speaking South America, or the Spanish part of South America, excluding Brazil, the death toll was so catastrophic that by the end of the Revolutionary period, Spanish South America had a population less than that of Italy. It was so depopulated. The scale on a per capita basis is comparable to World War One and World War II combined.
Wow.
It was the bloodiest conflict that wasn't surpassed in terms of numbers until, I mean, well, obviously you had the Andalusian Rebellion and stuff like that in China where you have these crazy high death tolls. But within, let's just say, Western European history, that wasn't surpassed until World War One.
Hmm. Yeah. I guess brother wars don't apply to Hispanics, huh?
Yeah, that's the thing. And like for example, like the Paraguayans nearly got completely genocided. 90% of their men died in the Triple Alliance War that happened
Uh-huh.
right after the Revolutionary period. And it's a very unique case in Roman Catholic history for sure, where essentially a whole lot of women were looking they were going to starve to death because they had no men to care for them.
Mhm.
And so the bishop in Paraguay like said, okay, this one time only, every man must take nine wives. Um, and because every man
Wow.
had to support, these women would have starved to death. And and that's the only that's it's interesting. It's the only time where, like, at least in recent Catholic history, where what do you call it? Polygamy was used for one generation, but it was mainly because a lot of these women were going to starve to death, etc., and a lot of these kids were going to die if they had no men to take care of them. So it's a very interesting case. But yeah, so that's why, like, when you look at Latin America, like, it all just collapsed. I mean, some places managed to stay wealthy for a while, like Argentina, like Venezuela, but Argentina, it collapsed in the 20s with its own internal contradictions, and then Venezuela, started going downhill after 1957, and it shows no sign of turning around. And even then, even like the wealth that Venezuela had is but a shadow relative to what New Spain was, or even Nueva Granada. It's yeah. Anyway, it's a tragic history of this is what happens if you. This is the thing I'll say. Like, literally, Hispanidad knew better. Like, they had the Roman Catholic Church, which explicitly taught, hey, Masonry is occultic, it's satanic, it's a mortal sin. Don't get involved with this stuff. And they looked to English Masonry, and the elites were like, yeah, that's cool. Let's do that. And so when I look at, to tie it back to what I started with, when I look at the relationship between America and Hispanidad, I see it as essentially 200 years of God's judgment. America is essentially the Babylon well, Babylon was to Israel. America has been to Hispanidad. Our elite chose Masonry, massacred, killed lots and lots of people who fought against it, and we've been subject to our American Mason overlords for 200 years as punishment for it. So
Hmm.
anyway,
You're blowing my mind, man.
Yeah.
That
I I guess that there's this hope that China will be the Persia to liberate Latin America from the American Babylon. Um, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, I think I'm kind of resigned to a Chinese century, but I don't necessarily think it's going to be a good thing because, I mean, the way that I see it is that the forces that made China the modern power that it was are the same forces that controlled um, basically the flow of capital in the past century. So it's like great, we get more of the same bullshit except from a people whose language we don't speak and whose culture and religion we don't share.
Yeah, we'll see. It's the two big challenges for the Chinese leadership are three. So demographics, having to reverse their birth rates.
Uh-huh.
As much as what Xi really wants to push that around, even as a young man, he was pushing against the one-child policy in the stuff that he was involved with when he was a low-ranking guy. That's a big part because the thing is, even with the the two-child and then the three-child policy, and even with the removal of the cap in some of the rural areas, a lot of people still aren't having children because in that part of the culture, it's gone. The culture is only materialist. Like China is super materialist. So that's rebuilding Chinese culture is the big problem, which leads to the second problem of that has to be done to get the reversal of birth rates. And then the
Uh-huh.
third big problem is the environment. China has completely destroyed its environment, its water. Reversing that's the big challenges that Xi Jinping has on his plate. And so
Well,
that's what, yeah.
the thing is, the Chinese population is so massive that they can lose half of their population and still be number two. Uh, so I think on a purely like utilitarian calculus, I think long term the party is thinking we're going to half or more of you are going to die, so let's just shore up the percentage of the population that isn't so useless. So yeah, I again, I don't know how to predict how things will work because I don't know the Chinese mindset. I don't know Chinese culture, but I mean, yeah, we'll see what happens. I mean,
I was
uh,
thinking if they lost half their population, they'd be number three because we're 750 million. So I mean,
we
granted, we're shattered into 24 pieces, but
oh, right, right.
yeah,
If you're thinking,
They're
you're
like
thinking,
states, if
you're
you want to think
thinking
of.
of Latin America as a block.
yeah, or
Okay.
all of Hispanidad, or all of former Hispanidad. Yeah, granted, that's
Yeah, and
including the Philippines, but
That's what the United States is. It's a
no, I
block.
think you're including Brazil. And
Mhm.
honestly, I think that honestly, I mean, as much as I want to be a patriot or a nationalist, I mean, I'm just so disappointed with how I'm just so disappointed with how the Philippines has handled the pandemic because honestly, they're worse than New Zealand and Australia combined. I mean, Duterte has openly said we should just vaccinate people in their sleep so that they don't have a choice. I don't know if he's just talking out of his ass, but um,
Well, he
uh,
was gay, so
yeah, I didn't know that, but then again, I don't know a lot of things about
That was the whole Owen
here's
Benjamin rant for 3 weeks, right? Or
yep,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I
He
didn't hear
was
that.
gay. He used to be, which
Yeah,
explains a lot.
but I think the Philippines has they have thoroughly jettisoned the Hispanic identity, and they traded it for something that I think is honestly worse. They traded Hispanism for being quote unquote Asian, and the thing is, still nobody really thinks of Filipinos as Asian because they're just too poor and too Catholic. Uh, and I don't know. I don't know. I think geopolitically, the Philippines cannot exist as an independent power. It always has to be. It always has to be a colony of someone else. So I think strategically they are aligning towards China, except when it comes to the Spratly Islands. Uh, I think they're. I don't know. I think that they're trying to play the Americans and the Chinese off of each other. But I mean, I just cannot forgive how irrational and pick me uh, their response to the pandemic is. And I mean, the fact that they're taking such a hard line uh, with
I,
regard to.
I think it's the problem actually is in Catholicism, or it's in the Catholic Church and the people within it. Because I mean, I go to mass and there's still people with masks on, and especially when I go north, where my parents live in North Texas.
Hmm.
They're all there's not within the church kind of in that area, and I suspect this is similar to the Philippines. For some reason, they're culturally isolated from their Catholicity, and that there's still this hunger within these people to have some kind of connection uh, around them, and it's going to be geographically, I think, necessarily if they lose, or if they don't have the deep connection with their Catholicity. I think that's
Yeah.
what's going on in all of the United States with Catholics right now.
Yeah. The thing is, the traditionalists. Uh, Somebody pointed this out nearly 2 years ago, that the traditional Catholics have had more of a hard line against the virus regime than even the libertarians, because
Oh, I wasn't speaking of the traditionalists. I mean the American Catholic Church.
yeah, just the normie ordos, as I call them. But
Well, yeah, and
okay, I
okay, I
mean,
guess that's a good description.
yeah, I mean, I get that. I get that most people are unable to make a commute to a traditional parish because they're just so far away. But uh, this is the problem. I mean, Jose Miguel can probably uh, gloat about the state of the Roman Church, but the thing is, the papacy. Um, when you look at it from a certain point of view, or when you manipulate it from a certain point of view, it can be the greatest hindrance to the actual practice of the Catholic faith. Because okay, um, from a normie point of view, uh, it w- the thing is, whatever the Pope says goes. So if you have a Pope that is in the pockets of the globalist oligarch class, or as I like to call Francis, he's the vicar of Jeffrey Sachs, then then the ordinary Catholic is going to say that the metaphysical buck stops with whoever's in Rome at the time. And
Oh
that
gosh, I,
if he's saying that taking the vaccine is uh, an act of charity, and a sign that
oh,
you, or those ridiculous things that he says, then people are not going to question it.
I,
And and
I just had this. I don't know what you call it. Elucidatory moment here. It's like an epiphany.
wow.
It is okay. It's strange from a Roman Catholic viewpoint. Why has the Orthodox Church still been in schism with the Roman Church? And I mean schism from I'm saying it from the biased Roman Catholic standpoint. Why why would something stay in schism that long? One of the things we've done, I've done in a Sunday school thing back when I did that, when we talked about apologetics, was showing how all these different heresies off of the church, they always end up dying within like 400 years and things like that. And, it has a graph that basically projects the Protestants will evaporate and come back to Catholicism. Well,
Well, I
with that
think
kind of thing, well, let's see, with that kind of thing in mind, it's yeah, the truth comes out and everything comes back to the one true church, which is the Roman Catholic Church. But it begs the question, even if you're a Roman Catholic bias, why has God not made those Orthodox see the error of their ways and get back with us? Right? It sticks in the kind of the craw of Roman Catholicism.
well, I'm
Well,
sure Jose Miguel has an answer for that.
no. This is the really cool part. I just realized, or it came upon me. There's a reason for that,
Hmm.
and it's a divine reason. And the separation of the Orthodox from the Roman Catholic was probably just for this moment in history, actually,
Yeah.
because the problem we have right now is a complete lack of orthodoxy within the Roman Catholic Church because it's become infected. And right now we're all doubting, or at least I'm doubting, what the hell is going on. I can't trust the idea that the Pope's infallible. Uh, how could a person like that be put in place? And anyway, all of the doubt, that kind of doubt is churning within you. If you're an honest Catholic, if it's not churning yet, it will be, as Bergoglio is just made to look like a complete fool, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the issue with the Roman Catholic Church is that it's lost its orthodoxy, and that was probably going to happen long-term projection wise in God's mind, right? And he says, I've got to keep something alive over here, because this body of the church, now this is biased Roman Catholic, Jose. This is my main thing, and I want to make sure it survives, and I need this offshoot that's orthodoxy. So when the time comes and when everyone's doubting, the Orthodox Church will come in and help facilitate the reunification. And there'll be probably some battles about Pope and what all that means, and authority things, but it will bring both halves back together. And so it's like that thing was cleaved off as a life support system for the future to deal with this issue with the modernity and Freemasonry. I don't know, it's kind of mind blowing to me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm not one to gloat, as Cephas knows. We're saying that in jest. But I do see that there's truth to that. As when things break off of the church, they don't last. Protestantism does have a time limit on it, evangelicalism in particular. I know from my own extended family, when Hispano goes Protestant, they'll have children and they'll have a couple grandkids, but they will not have great grandchildren. The birth rates collapse generationally. It is, and it's something I see as consistent. I see that in Colombia. I see that here in the States as well. That's part of why I see Protestantism as a form of at least for Hispanic culture, it is a death cult. You become Protestant, you're essentially condemning your great grandkids to not be born. In regards to the schism, the thing is, things are coming to a head, and it is going to become super clear, even to the lowest level of laity, where things went wrong in the schism. And that, when we talk about things that last, schism groups that last, they tend to die out within 300-400 years. The longest lasting one was the Nestorians with the Church of the East, but they died out just under 1,000 years after they schismed. They're not completely gone, but they used to be. This is the irony. In the 12th century, the church. So people, they're Orthodox and Catholic apologists who argue about who did more missionary work. The fact is, in the 12th century, the largest Christian body or Christian communion was the Nestorians, and the Nestorians, population-wise, were larger than the Orthodox and the Roman Catholics combined. So they were that huge in the 12th and 13th century, and then today they barely make 200 or like 500,000, if even that. They're almost completely gone. So they collapsed in the 15th century, a little over 900 years after they broke off. So anyway, that's what I put at. I get the impression there's a thing about 1,000 years after a schism happens as kind of the terminus, like the maximum possible terminus. And the fact is, we are coming up to the 1,000 years on anniversary of the schism. That's only 34 years away, and so I do think things are going to get very clear over the next 34 years.
Yeah, I got some serious thinking to do myself, and I don't know. It just after all this thing gets the dust is settled, it'll just be the Catholic Church, because it'll be an Orthodox Church, and we can drop the Roman part. We'll be the Catholic Church again at some point, or the Universal Church. Catholic only because.
Yeah, there actually is. So, because that's something that's been discussed a lot within Orthodox circles, but there is actually a list. It's like 30-something things, and this is coming from traditional Orthodox clergy. Like, these are the things where if things that need Rome would need to concede on for Orthodoxy to return the Orthodox churches to return to communion. So it's it's just like 30 key points. I don't have it off the top of my head, and I'm sick, so functioning at 80% or 50% capacity, mental capacity. But I remember reading that, and the fact is, by the end of this, like I can tell you from the Orthodox perspective, my experience from within the church, there is a sorting that is happening. There is a separation between the wheat and the chaff, especially among the bishops. It's very clear which bishops are real, which bishops are not, which ones care about their flock and are striving to be Christ-like, which ones are
Hint,
wolves.
it's none of the Go Arch ones.
Correct. Yeah. Yeah. But the thing is, even among the Greeks, like not within Goarch, but within Greece itself, like the Metropolitan of Morphu, for example, is the most rock solid bishop in the world right now, probably, and probably one of the most rock solid bishops in all the history of bishops. So, like even the Greeks, like they have a few bishops that are fantastic, but and then the rest are absolutely terrible, like really bad. The
Roman Catholic bishops.
Greek. This is the Greek, Greek church in particular. Yeah. The same thing in Russia. It's been very clear which bishops are solid, which ones are not at this point. Um, and it's honestly, I see how COVID is playing out, and I have a lot of confidence that at least in the Orthodox world, in the Orthodox Church, the next generation of bishops are going to be fantastic. Mainly because one, the bad ones are going to be dying off. And two, all they're going to have less, all the monastic candidates they're going to have left are going to be the ones who are rock solid in the tradition. And this is another part. This is more, it's not speculation because there's evidence for it, but there is evidence that there's an upcoming Council of Nicaea that Patriarch of Constantinople is planning on having a meeting thing with the Pope Francis. And there is rumors that he's going to try to single-handedly restore communion between Rome and Constantinople on that date, on that anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. And that is, the irony is, Pope Francis is going to be receiving the worst possible bishops from the Orthodox world, literally leaving Orthodoxy with really, really solid bishops. So it's I'll be honest, if that actually does happen, my condolences to all my Roman Catholic friends.
Right.
You're about to receive the worst bishops in the world who work for the U.S. State Department, many of whom are Masons, and that would result in the exile of the worst. Because so when there was an infiltration within the Vatican. At the same time, the Rockefellers in the United States attempted an infiltration within the Orthodox Church, but the Anglo-American establishment was under the belief that the Patriarch of Constantinople was like the Pope of the East. They failed to understand that Orthodoxy is actually, while it is hierarchical, it is decentralized. So they only managed to make headway in Constantinople and Greece, and that's about it. After they made their headway into Constantinople and Greece, all the other jurisdictions immediately banned their seminaries and churches, etc., from receiving money from any foundation that has a name like Rockefeller or Ford, or you get the picture.
Yeah.
So anyway, I look forward to seeing how that's going to go down with that joint meeting at the anniversary of that specific. I forget which anniversary. It's like a big number for the Council of Nicaea.
It'll probably be 2025 because that'll be the 1700th anniversary of Nicaea.
Yep. That's it.
And just to explain a bit of the inside baseball for Eugenius Bear, the Patriarchate of Constantinople and Moscow had a schism. I think it was around 2014 because what happened was that the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, attempted to put itself under the authority of the Church of the Church in Constantinople, when traditionally and for centuries they had been under the purview of the Patriarchate of Moscow. So there has been a break in communion between Constantinople and Moscow, which is kind of ironic considering that Constantinople is the mother church of, well, actually, it's the mother church of Kiev. And one of the things that, one of the aspects of the Ukraine-Russia conflict that that keeps getting glossed over because our society is so atheistic is that
Oh, I can't
the
see it.
one of the axes of conflict is um, religious in nature because the Ukrainians, or I guess part of what you could call Ukraine, was under part of it used to be part of the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth, and another part, particularly in the southwest, was part of the Austrian Empire. So, um, a lot of Ukraine is actually Eastern Catholic rather than Orthodox. So,
It's always
there's,
leaned a little more toward Rome, I guess.
yeah, so
Post-Union
there,
of Brest. But
yeah,
what Constantine did was actually much worse than what Cephas described. So the short history of it. So there's the canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which has existed, since it was first set up by Greek missionaries more than 1,000 years ago.
Hmm.
So that's headed by Metropolitan Onufry. The Ukrainian government has intensely persecuted him, his clergy. A lot of clergy have been murdered. So what happened is the United States set up a parallel church in Ukraine called the Orthodox Church in Ukraine, the OCU. So you have the UOC, Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is the one that's existed for more than 1,000 years, and then you have the OCU, which is the American invention. And they installed as clergy a bunch of anathematized heretics who were never ordained as clergy ever. So you had this fake church practiced by this U.S. State Department operating in Ukraine, which the United States government set up. It's not the only one. There are two other fake Ukraine Orthodox churches the United States government has set up. One of them being the Autocephalous Belarusian Orthodox Church, which is such a joke. No one in Belarus is part of it. It's
Quick
literally
quick
yeah.
pause though. The
Uh,
USCCB is that not really the same thing you're talking about?
no,
USCCB. What is that?
that's the United States
I know,
Conference.
but is that a construct that we decided to place upon ourselves that was worked through the church doing essentially the same thing you're talking about, like installing
Yeah,
a
it's
parallel
totally.
fake
All right. Okay, here's the 411 on the USCCB. It was formed by communists. Done.
Okay, that's kind of what I thought, but I've never really explored it.
Yeah. So essentially, so you have this fake church, which has no connection whatsoever to the Orthodox Church or even to Rome. It has none.
Hmm.
Staffed by anathematized individuals, and then the Patriarch of Constantinople gets a bunch of money from the U.S. State Department, and some financial shenanigans was looked over in New York, which resulted in the Patriarch of Constantinople writing a letter that, by decree, recognized this American-backed church as the official, real Orthodox Church within Ukraine, and officially, with the stroke of a pen, declared that all their clergy, who were all anathematized individuals who were never ordained, as being accepted as clergy, as full clergy, which one is completely uncanonical. The idea that you can make someone a bishop or a priest or a deacon by signing a letter, no laying on of hands,
Yeah.
no nothing, or the fact that you can do this to anathematize individuals without the anathemas being lifted, is just wholly unheard of. Likewise, it is a violation of the canons of setting up literally. It's a violation of the canons of setting up a parallel altar where there's already an altar in place. So you already have canonical Ukrainian Orthodox Church, and he just officially recognized the OCU, which was not Orthodox at all, not
Can't get more
apostolic.
heretical than what you just described, actually.
Exactly. So that has caused immense turmoil. And then, of course, the United States government did Euromaidan, where they installed a neo-Nazi regime government that officially declared OCU to be the official Ukrainian church and not the UOC. They seized the churches, the cathedrals, etc., from the UOC, handed them to the OCU. And this is where things get interesting because they did this during the winter. And so you had Metropolitan Onufry and the other bishops. They literally held the divine liturgy in the cold, in the public parks. They consecrated picnic tables where they could have the Eucharist. So these people were meeting in 5 feet of snow, and the cathedrals, which were controlled by the UOC, were completely empty. It's the UOC's membership, the fake church's membership, even to this day, is a tiny little fraction of the canonical church. Many clergy have been murdered. It's probably the most brutal persecution that currently exists anywhere for Orthodox Christians, especially now that ISIS has been destroyed. But post ISIS, defeat of ISIS, like Ukraine has been where the most persecution of Orthodox is in the entire world.
So the Ukrainians, they really want, or the real Ukrainian people, their loyalty is more toward Russia, for
Their
sure.
loyalty to the church. It's interesting because
Okay.
essentially what the Ukrainian people have faced, because there's a huge swath of them, they don't want to be part of Russia. But among the faithful, they don't want to be part of a schismatic heretic group. So the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian faithful, have had a choice where they can essentially choose to stay part if they want. They can choose to keep their faith and effectively side with Russia, or they can choose their nationhood but reject their faith. It is an interesting case where I think Cade was trying to explain this to I think Jorville on Social Galactic recently, and I knew what Cade was referring to. Because Cade has a prediction that the Christian nationalism that Vox describes, the people who follow this ideology, they're going to hit a point where they're going to have to choose between the nationalism and the Christian part. This is what happened in Ukraine. The faithful face the choice. You can have your nationalist. You can be a Ukrainian nationalist, or you can be an Orthodox Christian. You cannot be both. And overwhelmingly, they chose. So far, the choice has been no. They'll hold on to the faith. And so it's a very interesting point because I have a huge sympathy with Americans who are losing their national identity. But I look at what Ukraine is facing, and to be frank, I face a similar choice. My own faith journey. Going deep into the schism, etc. I mean, granted, I walked into an Orthodox church because I wanted hesychasm. That's what I was mainly interested in. But realizing, wait a second, I think my ancestors were wrong on the schism. That forced me to make a decision where essentially, my comfortable national, ethnic, civilizational identity versus the faith. So I have a lot of empathy with the Ukrainians because they essentially I had a similar situation, albeit with no persecution that they had to face, and also in terms of what was also not being spoken about in regards to the Ukraine crisis from a geopolitical standpoint, the first capital of the Rus was Kiev. The Ukrainian people were, all of Eastern Ukraine, they're Russians. They speak Russian. And then once you get to Western Ukraine, they're Poles in denial. The Catholic Ukrainians, they're Poles. They always have been Poles. And they were mainly brought in after the Union of Brest in the 16th century. I think it was 1582, some point in the 1500s. I forget when. Yeah, so that's the thing with Ukraine. It's not, Ukrainian nationalism is a joke in that it's not a real nation. It's essentially a bunch of Poles and a bunch of Russians forced together in the same state who are constantly divided against each other. It is similar to the Czechoslovakia, essentially.
Well, gentlemen, I think I'm going to wrap it up because I don't like my streams to go past 2 hours, and it's already 2. So, any last thoughts, or should we?
Last thoughts are just, this is great, guys. I kind of sat down here with zero expectations and had one of the better conversations I've had in months. So,
yeah.
My last
thank
thought.
you.
You got it, Eugenius. My last thought for you would be if you want to know, one, this will help you connect with the Catholicity part and know Catholic history, but also know the history of the Tejanos that live around you, or if not immediately next to you, within half an hour of you. Definitely check out the missions. Like, do a tour of all the missions. You'll learn a lot about the history of the people that first settled here, the evangelization of the natives, and you'll know the history of that's a good place to start. And then from there, you can start looking into the history of the spread of Masonry and the revolutions. But a good place to start is with the history of the Spanish Church, the evangelization of the natives, and you can just, given where you're at, you're not far away from San Antonio, and there are plenty of missions all throughout Texas that you can take your family on.
Yeah.
Good idea. I think I will.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
End broadcast.